Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and I'm talking astrology. I've called this video the Tsunami of Change, 19th of November to 7th of December, which is because this period of time is going to be so important, but it is only part of this tsunami of change, which is taking place politically, socially, consciously, consciousnessly, if you can have such a word. And I want to talk about this. And before I get there, though, I want to thank all of you so very much for all your comments and all your support. I feel very privileged to have all of you as followers. And what I like is that you're so kind and also unbiased. And of course, that's what I try to be. I don't always succeed. Sometimes, I'm an Aries, and sometimes I can't prevent my enthusiasm for something coming through. But I do try to be objective about the astrology. And that's why we're going to begin by taking that elephant in the living room and having a look at the fact that all the way through up to the election in America on the 5th of November, it looked as though things were very finely balanced between the two. We had lots of good, positive Jupiter influences for both candidates. And it was, difficult to pick in some ways. You had to look at other factors. And of course, the pollsters were predicting quite a big win towards the end with the last Iowa prediction for Kamala. So it was almost as though the pollsters were backing the astrology, or the astrology was backing the pollsters, whichever way around you want that to be. But the fact that the result brought in Mr. Trump and the reasons for that, which I'm just going to look at shortly because they're part of this tsunami of change, is really something I think astrologers have to address. Because even if you do say, oh, well, some astrologers got it bang on the nail, it wasn't Mr. Trump. Well, that is to say, well, what are you going to do with all those very bullish influences that Kamala had? I mean, they were equal. So that's a consideration. And, as astrologers, we have to make some kind of decision based on what we see. So, and I'm not making excuses here. I'm just saying that's what all of us do, especially those of us who have to rely on our little grey cells. We have to rely on our years of experience to say, oh, what? I think. But anyway, yes, I want to really look at this idea of this sort of wave of consciousness that's coming in, this notion of the rise of the divine feminine. And we can see a lot of evidence in that. And there has been a lot of evidence about this over the years. Really, certainly we can probably start with the big surge when we get to the Me Too movement. But it's been a groundswell, really. And if you think over a long period of time, women have definitely gained a lot more power in the sense of taking on more roles of leadership. We've seen that in evidence all over the world. And that women's voice is definitely heard. So this wave has been going on for a time. And we are at a very interesting peak. And I'm going to explain this in a little moment. But I want to say that what we understood, and remember, we're all learning about this as we go. And I'm still putting together, I haven't got my finished kind of theory about all of this. It's a working theory, a working hypothesis, and is gathering a little bit more glue or a little bit more shape, if you like, through the events that are going on in the world. And I put some of my ideas forward in my Friday Bite of the 8th of November. And probably over the months to go, it will become much more of a cohesive kind of theory. But what it was that got me adding to my conviction, my feelings already, was the understanding that what had made the difference in this election, what had really carried Mr. Trump forward, were the votes of young men. And they were a very strong force. And it caused me to look at what this was. And there are various kind of opinions that the heterodoxy, this kind of wave really of, well, it might at one time have been called libertarianism, but it's now more a kind of hyper masculinity, if you like, which Donald Trump epitomizes. In a way, this is a pushback against that divine feminine, the rise of the feminine, the voice of the feminine. Then you've got this pushback now, and interestingly enough, with young men. And we can also look at this in terms of this lean to the right, which is happening worldwide. Now, I'm not saying every single government that's had an election has gone to the right. That's not the case. But if you look at the overall pattern, that is definitely the swing to the right. So we think about this, and we think about, of course, the fear of fascism and what happened in the 1930s when, and of course, that came about because Germany was devastated after the war, the World War II, and the impoverished state of the nation was such they needed a very strong leader to come in and put things right, to fix things. And of course, you know what happened. This went to an extreme. I'm not going to fill you in there. But you can see, in a way, this voting for a lot of the far-right leaders across the world, because every country, every Western country certainly, is suffering from the effects of COVID, what happened, the war in Ukraine, the shortages, the cost of living going higher and higher. And I think every nation, unless you're extremely rich, is suffering from the sense of, well, this isn't what life used to be like. You know, I now have to think about how much butter I buy. You know, it's affecting everybody. And this was a very strong drive also in the American election, was that people felt, you know, they want to go back to a time when they could live normally, not this time where everything seems to be cost so much and there's not enough money to go around. And so this combined with this heterodoxy, if you like, this pushback from especially young males, is going on all over the world. It isn't just in America. So this made me think a little bit more about this whole age of Aquarius, and we need to think about this because as I said quite a long time ago, the idea that Saturn and then Jupiter went into Aquarius was certainly a sign that, hello, that we are now beginning to really get the age of Aquarius on its way. And remember, there isn't a day when the age of Aquarius comes in. It's very fluid. But I think certainly Pluto's entry into Aquarius really said, oh, we're all on stage now. We're all beginning. We are now in the Aquarian age. And, you know, I've described this, you know, Pluto coming out of Capricorn, entering Aquarius, the two great oceans meeting, and that transitional, that area where they meet being very, very stormy, very, very rocky, is what we're in as well. But we have sort of got, I think, not the full picture of what Aquarius means. Now, what I'm going to say now doesn't mean that I'm talking about every single Aquarian, you know, in the world. Remember, when we think about Aquarius being our sun sign, or whatever sign we may have as our sun, it's one part of a much bigger picture. It's an important part. It is our brand. It is our nationality, if you like. So we share our characteristics with a whole, you know, millions and millions of other people, but there are differences from Aquarian to Aquarian, and they're sort of broad categories. And this in part has a lot to do, especially with Aquarius, of the different rulership. The old ruler, Saturn, and the modern ruler, the new ruler, discovered in 1781, Uranus. So this complex kind of coupling of this particular sign, when we start looking at it in terms of the kind of trends that come about when with Aquarius, for instance, and especially now we're thinking about the age of Aquarius, we've got to look at the full picture of Aquarius, and the understanding of this rulership of both Saturn and Uranus is very important, because mythologically Saturn and Uranus were both tyrants, really, in a way. They were certainly patriarchal figures, and Aquarius is a fixed sign, and all fixed signs like to be in control, and that isn't a bad thing. You know, people who like to be in control are often movers and shakers, if you like. And you know, what I'm saying here is, in the broader theme of things, we've got to remember this authoritarian, controlling, restrictive, patriarchal even, combination of Saturn and Uranus with Aquarius. We can't ignore it. Now, we think about the last time Pluto was in Aquarius, and we go back to 1778, you know, around the time of the Declaration of Independence, when America fired the monarchy, sent it back to England, and said, no, we're going to rule ourselves now. We're going to divide ourselves up into states, and that's how we're going to rule. We're a democracy now. So we think about Aquarius and democracy, and the brotherhood of man is most certainly a kind of theme that we go with Aquarius. But we've got to remember, democracy has been really part and parcel of most or many countries, really, since World War II. I mean, most Western countries have voted in their parliament, their leaders, and so the people have voted. And when we think about democracy and the power of the people, let's think about the fall of the Berlin Wall and the breakup of the Soviet Union. That was brought about by people power, people saying, this is wrong, we don't want this. And so we come forward really to this period of time, and we have to remember that all the countries that have moved to the far right, or they've got an extreme government in most cases, they've been voted in freely by the people. Yes, I know there's some interferers here and there. We know where they are, so let's leave them there. But it's this idea that the people are voting for a particular government and a particular type of leadership. And we are really seeing this more autocratic, authoritarian nature of Aquarius, with Pluto in Aquarius now beginning. In fact, it begins on the 19th of November when I start this video, if you like. That's when the age of Aquarius comes fully into being, if you like. And we have now, you know, as we can see, certainly in the United States, but there are other countries that have voted in a very far-right kind of leader and government. So we are seeing this happen, and it's real, and we can't say it's not real. And we have to remember it's democratic. People have largely, in their, you know, hundreds, thousands and millions voted for who's coming in. So it is democratic. And what I would say at this point is, even though democratically they're in, these governments all over the world have been voted in, given enough time, it may be that the public would like to say, oh, I don't think we like this very much. But that may be, there may not be an opportunity to change that. So let's not go blindly into the age of Aquarius, thinking it's all peace and love and the feminine spirit. It is absolutely not. And what we saw, at least, you know, to begin with, and maybe it's going to take more Plutos and Aquariuses to finally get to what we're looking at with a Pluto and Aquarius. In Aquarius, we're looking at not the divine feminine per se, nor the divine masculine. We're looking at divine equality, real egalitarianism. That's what we're looking at with Aquarius. So we're a bit of a long way away from it right now, and maybe we'll get there. So, yes, I wanted to talk about these things. And I also wanted to say that I know from my post bag and from talking with some of my clients, there was this great sense: what happened to the divine feminine? Where's it gone? Why didn't we see this coming in force? And you've got to remember, in the big sweep of time, this is, well, just a pit stop. It's not a full stop. There's got to be a lot more balancing going up. And as we think of Libra as a sign of balance, another air sign, but I think Aquarius too is always seeking the equality, how things are equal. And we have this huge heterodoxy coming forward. We've got this huge masculine wave coming forward, and it needs to, in order to get the balance. So that really was something I wanted to begin with. So another thought, really, before I start getting into the astrology of this period of time, is that, oh gosh, 2 decades ago, I was writing about the age of Aquarius and considering it to be a time of when totalitarian governments would be in power. And I was also talking about the new order, that there would be a new world order in the age of Aquarius. And we are seeing that order take place now. If you have the opportunity to look beyond your own country and your own governments and have a look across the world at what you're seeing, and you're seeing how we've got Putin, we've got North Korea, we've got China, we've got India, and we've got the West, and everything is in a state of flux. This is a huge reshaping of the world going on as we see it. And it will be turbulent, and it is important we're aware of that. And I think we make ourselves aware by looking at other countries and considering the whole picture, not just the picture as it is from our own country's perspective. We're part of a much bigger whole. Now, one of the features of this period, and those of you who've seen my previous videos will have known that I've talked about the prevailing Mars-Pluto opposition. And of course, this was very present at the time of the election. And as I'm talking to you, it's very present. And we need to really bear in mind just the periods Mars is going to continue to oppose Pluto. And just to get this right, and I might put it at the bottom of my description here, but we're looking at the 11th of October to the 23rd of January. Mars will be in orb of Pluto. So there'll be this opposition presiding over life and everything else. It will go retrograde in that time, but the whole period consider Mars's opposition Pluto. Then, of course, in its retrograde motion, it's going to pull really right away from that opposition to Pluto, and it won't come back until the 5th of April. And then we have all of April and half of May. I think it's the 14th of May. Mars really does pull right away going forward from that Mars-Pluto opposition. And we've got to remember that this isn't the first time a Mars-Pluto opposition has been in existence. I mean, it happens every 18 to 20 months. It's not uncommon. But normally, a Mars-Pluto opposition will last a couple of weeks, maybe 3 at the most. It isn't very long. But what makes this one different is that it's going on for such a long time. And remember, it started on October the 11th. So, and you only have to look around and see what was happening at that time and what's going on now to realize that we're definitely feeling the effects of this. The other thing that makes this Mars-Pluto opposition more significant is the degrees it's falling on. 29 degrees of Capricorn, 29 degrees of Cancer for Mars, if you like, and then moving to 0 degrees of Leo, 0 degrees of Aquarius, and then a little bit further forward to 2, almost 3 degrees of Aquarius and 3 degrees of Leo. So we're at the very end of one sign, 29 degrees of Capricorn, and at the very, very beginning of the other, 0 degrees of Aquarius. And Mars is playing on these critical degrees. Remember, the 29th degree of a sign is called the anaretic degree. So it's very significant. A lot of stress and crisis occurs when we're moving through or experiencing things on a daily basis. When things reach 29 degrees, we tend to go through a period of strife and struggle. You know, it's difficult, it's tension, crisis, all those kind of words. So this is what makes this Mars-Pluto opposition a little bit more powerful. And I have talked about Mars and Pluto before, a couple of other videos, but I think it's going to serve us to look at it again, because when we think about the principles of Mars and we're looking at action, we're looking at desire, and we're looking at combat. Those are good Mars words. And with Pluto, we're looking at transformation, we're looking at elimination, we're looking at creative destruction. So that's why when you put these two planets together, especially when they're conjunct, when they're in opposition, or when they're in square, it's always the hard angles that are the dynamic ones. That's when you get the full effects of what two planets together will manifest as. If you've got trines and sextiles, a little bit more fudgy. They're still there, they're still having a relationship with each other, but it's not quite as dramatic, it's not quite as obvious. So if we think about Mars-Pluto conjunctions, squares, oppositions, now many of us were born with a Mars-Pluto aspect. And if you're one of them and you're listening to me now, you must be thinking, oh my goodness, what does this mean? Well, like anything, it depends on your consciousness, your experience, the times you're living in, as to how that Mars-Pluto vibe will actually manifest in you. But if we're looking at the pluses of this, it means intense ambition, complete commitment to something, very intense, whether that's commitment to the job in hand, whether it's commitment to a belief, whether it's commitment to a person. And Mars-Pluto is intense and extreme. And we can see that great kind of actions can come about by persistence and effort, by breaking down those walls of opposition. And not only that, but in the process of pushing and fighting for what you believe in or what you want to have happen, this is a Mars-Pluto aspect, you are transformed in that process. You become another person. And the principle of transformation, if you know how to transform yourself, you can help others to transform. So Mars-Pluto people are transformers. And of course, I've now got that image of those little big vehicles converting themselves into a robot. Well, it's not a bad image to have. You know, it is about transforming. But in a negative way, when you put Mars and Pluto together, that, you know, spirit of desire, of action, of combat turns more cruel and ruthless. And, you know, whatever Pluto is inspiring from its dark depths to bring up to the light, you've got really dark forces coming up, whether you want to think of that as the power of evil or all sorts of unconscious dark drives that exist within us all. So it can be very self-destructive as well as acting destructively towards other people. So that's what you're playing with a Mars-Pluto configuration. And of course, this is where astrology is really a wonderful tool, because if you know that, you can think, hey, I recognize that in myself. I recognize I'm ruthlessly ambitious and maybe I've trodden on a few toes in order to reach my targets. And then you can think about, how can I manifest this better? Or if you are someone who maybe doesn't realize that they have this power within them, a Mars-Pluto power, need perhaps to engage with it a bit more and in a way that is not harmful to others, but gives you the power to transform your own life. So that's what we're playing with a Mars-Pluto aspect. But then we think about the times we are living in. We think about all these terrible conflicts everywhere in the world. I mean, it's not just Ukraine. It's not, it's not just the Middle East. It's all over the place. And we're either seeing it really in terms of terrible weapons and destruction that we could see with our eyes, or we could see it really on a more abusive plane. It's like when we think about abuse generally, it isn't always about violence. It's about manipulation. It's about, overriding and crushing people with your ideas and theories, beliefs and behaviors. So, we're living under that at the moment, and we're seeing it very visibly in terms of what is going on with us. So I want to set this, as I said, in proportion, because, if we do go along with the idea that there is nothing good in a Mars-Pluto opposition, we are simply heading towards our own self-destruction, so to speak, then that gives us a sense that we must give up in the face of the opposition that we face. Whereas in fact, it's rather the reverse, really. We have to really rethink how that Mars-Pluto is expressed and see that maybe in some ways, a lot of walls do need to come down, just like the Berlin Wall, in order for the new development to take place. So I would say that the Mars-Pluto opposition isn't all bad, but at the same time, it's not easy to live with. And we are seeing more and more violence, more protests, more upset. And certainly in this time period, the 19th of November through to the 7th of December, we are going to see some really, really intense difficulties, and maybe even some of that violence reaching very unpleasant proportions. So let me now turn to a chart so that we can see the influences that are around us for this time period that I'm talking about. And what I've done is that I have actually drawn out the configurations, different colors, different lines, so that you can see the main planetary alignments. And, when we've got these big alignments like this, there is a lot going on. And I'm going to take the alignments one by one as well, so that we can see the dynamics of them all. So the first thing we need to be aware of is, as we reach the end of November, we can see that Mercury is going to turn retrograde on the 26th of November. And it's going to remain in retrograde until the 15th of December. Now, I often go on about this and say, look, it's not the worst thing in the world. It happens 3 or 4 times a year. And what we need to do is not only remember that we need to travel safely and not to do things at the last minute, because there's often congestion on the roads. There's all sorts of weather problems, cancellations of planes, all the things that happen on retrograde Mercury. But what's going to happen on this retrograde Mercury is that it's happening just before Thanksgiving in the United States. And of course, you may celebrate Thanksgiving anywhere in the world, but within the United States, then everybody is going to be flying from one place to another, or training it, or roading it, bicycling it. And with a retrograde Mercury, I think travel is going to be complicated around the time of Thanksgiving. And of course, when we think about Mercury now, we have to think about digital communications, satellite communications. So we can see that these also could be affected by the retrograde Mercury. So don't just breathe a sigh of relief when your train arrives on time, but to think too what's happening with the internet, what's happening with other things that sort of knock out communications. And that's probably a likelihood. But when we also think of a retrograde Mercury, we think about nostalgia, we think about journeys into the past. And of course, when we think about Thanksgiving and the run up to Christmas, which, Mercury will be retrograde in that first half of December, it is a time when people meet up with friends they haven't seen for a while, maybe get back in touch with families. And so there is this sense of returning over old ground, but in a warm and beautiful way. And of course, always, always, always on a retrograde Mercury, we have an opportunity to rethink things. We can think, you know what? I've changed my mind. As I often say, there's nothing wrong with changing your mind. You know, we've got this saying now, oh, this person is a flip-flopper because they decided they wanted to do something else. But, you know, being able to rethink something and consider, you know what, I knew that then, I know this now, and guess what, I'm going to change my mind. It's a good thing. If you want to change your mind on a retrograde Mercury. So lots of good things about this. Now, of course, as I'm speaking to you, it is before this impressive full moon on the 15th of November, which is conjunct Uranus. And of course, I've done a whole video on that. Now, the fact that it's so close to Uranus and the effect of the full moon, which is to amplify the effect of whatever it's connecting with astrologically, we are certainly going to have some upsets around this particular time. But as this video launches and you are seeing me this minute, you know, all that is behind me and I don't know it because I'm recording it beforehand. So let's not include that in our survey of these particular periods of time. But what else we have coming up, and I think early December is really, really important. The Sun is going to be squaring Saturn on Wednesday the 4th, but of course it will have been creeping up there since late November. And on the same day, we've got Mercury opposing Jupiter. Now, I'm going to go into this shortly. I'm just going to list it for you now so that you know. But this forms what we call a T-square, an alignment of tension. So all around this time, we're going to be seeing a lot of decisions made and maybe some breakdowns in communication because of retrograde Mercury for a start, but also because of this configuration. Now, 2 days later, Mars turns stationary retrograde. And of course, all throughout this period, really since about the 20th, 19th, 20th of November, it's in its stationary phase. It's slowing, it's slowing, it's slowing. And when Mars or any planet is coming to its stationary point, its effects are much stronger. We feel the effects much stronger. So all the things I've said about that Mars-Pluto opposition are going to be really intense. We're going to feel that much more. By the time we get to the 7th of December, the very day after Mars turns retrograde, we've got Mercury squaring Saturn, Venus conjoined to Pluto, the Sun opposition Jupiter, and last but not least, Neptune turning stationary direct. So we've got Mars turning retrograde, stationary. We've got Neptune turning direct, stationary. This makes Mars and Neptune, and we can also throw Pluto in there as well. Pluto just arriving at the 0 degrees of Aquarius. We just know this is a time of global significance. And leaders and governments are all going to be reflecting this. So we've got this mixture of violence, setbacks, changes of heart, difficult negotiations, breakdown of communications. And we've got all sorts of other things that happen at this time, which I'll go into a little more when we look at each configuration. That there's some essential good here as well. There is some sense that maybe things have to get to this point before they can get better. And we really need to be looking at the situations that evolve at this time with that mindset. Maybe things have got to go this way before they can start to get better. So keep remembering that as you go through. So there is my kind of list. As you can see on this particular horoscope, I've set it for Washington again, mainly, I suppose, because things come out so clearly when I place it here. We can see the importance of Neptune. We can see how it's part of that really big configuration there. And also, of course, there will be a lot going on in America at this point, because we're just before the certification goes on, and maybe that will be a bit of a tense time. Who knows? Who knows? I shouldn't say who knows. I'm meant to know. But we can sort of see that there's a lot of things going on at this time that are potentially the focus for these very, very powerful configurations. So come back to me for a minute, and I want to take the first of those configurations, which I hinted about, and that's this one. This is the Mercury opposing Jupiter squaring Saturn. Now, effectively, those of you who are interested and a little bit more sophisticated astrology-wise will recognize that when you've got a T-square, the planet at the apex of that T-square becomes the midpoint. It's at the midpoint of the other two. And this is why it's very significant. Now, earlier on, I did talk about the idea of communication breakdowns, and that's amplified by the fact that Mercury is retrograde. So we get interference with negotiations. There is missing information or false information. Problems with travel, I've discussed. We're also looking at things to do with regulations, rules, and laws because of Saturn. And if you think of Mercury and Jupiter being very much the signatures on the digital age, the spread of social media and all those news channels, we can see perhaps Saturn either coming in and saying, let's regulate this. It's a little bit too soon for regulations, I suppose, to come in for social media. But certainly the groundwork is being laid down by this configuration. More rules, more regulations going with communications. That's a simple translation of this. Now, we've also got to think that there's a positive energy with this particular configuration. And what we are probably looking at here is that the optimism and the good discussions that are taking place will lead to solid conclusions. We always have to look at the positives and negatives of everything, because in a way, the astrology is neither positive nor negative. It can be either, and there's a tier of meaning to everything we look at. So we are looking at a lot of positives here as well as negatives, which is why I bothered to mention them. The other configuration, I think, that is outstanding at this particular time. Now, you'll see that it looks like a kite, and it is. It is a kite. And the kite is made up of a grand trine, and that is formed, in this case, by the ascendant and the south node, Uranus and Pluto. And because Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are already aligned in what we call a mini grand trine or a minor grand trine, we've got the two things attached together, because Neptune, at the apex of that Uranus-Pluto trine, in this case, is opposing the south node. And on this particular chart that we've been looking at of Washington, we can see that it's the ascendant-descendant axis that is in focus here. So we've got a really, really big kite configuration. Now, a kite configuration is always a sort of, if you see it in a natal chart, you say, oh, this is special. This means this person has a special gift, that there is something in the life of this person that is going to manifest in some way, in a big way. It'll be for the good of humanity. It'll take something and develop it, and that will be of significance to humanity. So it's not a particularly common configuration, and wherever you have it, it is certainly special. Now, of course, there will be people who do have a kite configuration in their charts, and maybe by the time they've reached 80 years old, you'll say, well, what have you done? it doesn't necessarily always mean that that person will lead a life of significance, but made conscious, when we know about these things in our charts that show a certain destiny, we owe it to our destiny to be conscious of it and to think, how will I manifest this gift that I've been given? Now, you could also say, looking at this point in time and saying, well, surely with this nice configuration going on here, and it's involved the nodal axis, maybe this means great and good things are happening, and that's certainly something to look out for. The other point here is that that mini grand trine is made up of three outer planets, the three outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And this is very significant because in one way, we are beginning to discover more about the outer planets. I hesitate to say they are becoming more personalized, although I did put this idea forward, believe it or not, in 1992 when I wrote The Divine Encounters. I talked about this possibility, and I'm going to leave it in there, that we are now much more accessible. We're finding it more accessible. So these Uranian, Neptunian, and Plutonic forces are coming into our personal sphere. And that is something to bear in mind. But they are in harmony, really, at this point, and they will be for a large part of next year as well. I did do a little piece in my Friday Bite about Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, all of which were discovered after 1781, and they are the signatures on the nuclear age. So we've got uranium, neptunium, and plutonium, and we have to remember that's really important. And nuclear energy, of course, can be used for the benefit of mankind as well as its destruction. So this is an important configuration because it ties in such a lot to do with our collective destiny. And we need to look at everything I've been talking about with the Pluto and Aquarius, the new age of Aquarius that I began this video on that we can see now a configuration like this is really driving that point home. Just checking, do I need to say anything else about this? No, I think I've probably done all I want to do on this. It's probably raised a few questions. And as I said, you know, my theories about what's going on and where we're headed to are really in the process of becoming. They're not fully formed yet. I haven't quite got my head around it, but they're getting there. As you will see in this video, it might be quite an important video to see where I'm beginning to put these ideas together. And it's really a kind of balancing effect and a different side of things from perhaps what some of you may be used to hearing about this divine energy and how beautiful it is and the power coming back to the people and all of this. And I think we have to be realistic. And you know I am a realist. But even within that, I think we've got to have a much more rounded picture of all of this. So I'm going to end, and I had thought about my ending, as I always do. In my beginning, I thought about my ending. And I want to get this quote right. It's by Rainer Maria Rilke, or Rilke, some people say. And he was a poet. He died in 1926, and he left us with some wonderful, wonderful writing. He was a great philosopher, perhaps a little bit in the footsteps of Nietzsche, but you know, there are so many of his beautiful quotes, and I thought this one was very fitting for the now. And it's this. And I haven't done the whole thing. It's quite a long one. I've just separated out the things that I want to talk about. And this is what he says: be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart. Do not now seek the answers which cannot be given to you because you would not be able to live them. I think that's so wise, and I think it's so relevant to what we're living through right now. We are searching for answers. We're searching for reasons. But is it that we're not yet there? And we have to hold them in our heart as unanswered questions, but to understand that they can't be answered at this time because we wouldn't be able to hear them, or as Rilke says, we wouldn't be able to live them. And I think that's really important. We can't change what's happened. And whether you are listening to me and really feeling vindicated in many ways that, it was Trump all along, and how wonderful America will be. Now he's going to fix everything, so that you're in a wonderful headspace. Or whether you are listening to me and still nursing a lot of wounds from the bruising that the Democrats got, and also the sense that, well, where is all this energy, divine energy, taken us when it yields a result like that? Well, we have to look at the bigger picture. We're not yet ready to understand why. But that doesn't mean that along in the process of time, as we see things taking place, that things will become clearer to all of us. And as I said, I'm trying not to be biased here. Whatever your political persuasion is and whatever country you live in, this is really about the astrological dynamics and what they mean in terms of consciousness and our awareness of what's going on in the world and what we want to do about it and where it's all going. So thank you, everybody, for staying with me. And I look forward to being here in another couple of weeks. Bye for now.